represent Yobe North Senatorial District. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, let me, by way of intervention, follow suit to commend Mr. President for the presentation of a budget for renewed hope in Nigeria and in life. Mr. President, I dare say that the success of any government administration in a democracy will depend significantly on how the legislature supports the administration. And I believe that we have seen different examples of what could happen if the legislature decides to support an administration. And the support does not have to be that everything would be perfect. The legislature could decide, by way of support, to also identify areas of deficit and weakness in something that comes from the administration. So I believe that we must continue to give every possible support to this administration, to Mr. President, because this is our government, all of us, including those on my right. What I mean is this budget is our budget. But this budget alone does not determine what happens in terms of prosperity in Nigeria. What happens to 2022 supplementary budget? What has happened to 2023 Appropriation Act? And of course, when we provided supplementary for the security agencies, we expect that there will be improvement in security. I therefore submit that while talking on this appropriation bill for 2024, our committees should be also interested in what has happened in the implementations of 2022 supplementary for the palliatives, for 2023 budget, and for another supplementary for the security. Because that will give us clearer and better idea of what we should or we must appropriate. Having said this, Mr. President, let me put some few things in place. When our girls or our students are kidnapped or abducted from schools, education suffers. When our farmers cannot, in some places, particularly in northern Nigeria, go to their farms and cultivate their crops. Why? Security challenge. When solid minerals cannot be mined in so many parts of Nigeria where we have significant endowments, we have some security challenges even where efforts are made to mine them. And Zamfara comes to mind. Mr. President, we have every reason to spend more and more and more on security until we get it right. If we want the 1.7 million oil production target to be achieved, to fund the implementation of this budget, Mr. President, we need to continuously have a secured and a safe production environment in the Niger Delta. If we want our children and wards to go to school and remain in school and learn, and our teachers to go and teach, Mr. President, we need secured and safe schools. In the Northeast alone, by 2021, over 2,000 teachers were killed. And many thousands of schools have been closed in Nigeria today due to insecurity. I believe that the security challenges in Nigeria have made it difficult for us to realize most of our targets in terms of providing services to the people, building of infrastructure, and therefore, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, let's prioritize security. We provided some funds by way of supplementary. We must understand how those funds have been put into use and the outcome that we would have achieved. I believe that the security, in addition to the resources that we need to give them, we also need to look at their operational relationships. We have just returned from a seminar in Switzerland. I think most of the security-related committees were there. We returned this morning. And we could see where our gaps are when it comes to total security provision in our country. So, Mr. President, I will urge the Senate and indeed the National Assembly that we must never get tired of providing more and more funds and resources for our security and armed forces for us to achieve those lofty targets of diversifying our economy through safe agricultural environments, for educating our children and youth in our schools, for diversifying our economy through mining in those areas that are endowed with solid minerals. And Mr. President, we should ask ourselves, when we signed the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it was expected that Nigeria will be the major beneficiary, being the largest economy on the continent. Have we reviewed our performance in terms of the implementation of this? Certainly not. Two things, in my opinion, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. First, insecurity. Second, lack of power. Even though the Deputy Senate leader indicated that power is still there. Mr. President, if we are not able to see power being properly handled in the budget, due to whatever reasons, we should do so. We should provide better support for power. The last Senate, the last National Assembly, passed the power sector reform bill at our twilight, and it was assented to by then President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the power sector reform is one reform in the power sector, for the power sector, that will give us the necessary energy environment and mix through public, private, or private participation that will make power available for our economy to provide growth and development, and of course, the much desired prosperity. With this, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I support the second reading of this bill, and I also wish to say that it is gladdening that we are all making effort to pass the budget before the end of the year, a tradition, a feat achieved